Well, good evening, everybody. Really appreciate everybody jumping on. It's Mike Suleiman, founder of South Jersey Forward. We're a nonprofit, nonpartisan think tank and policy-based advocacy organization. Really appreciate everybody jumping on for a great conversation tonight. This is our second one of the week. Last night we had the great pleasure of having Mo Rushdie on from the River Wards Group, who talked to us about the effects and successes of the tax abatement program in the city of Philadelphia and how that could be a model for Atlantic City, building on our research on housing, particularly middle-class housing in Atlantic City, and how that could be replicated in not just Atlantic City, but Camden City, Vineland, and other urban areas in southern New Jersey. But tonight we're really excited to continue our discussion on the sad state of local media in southern New Jersey and how to fix it. And we have two great panelists here that we want to introduce, and we welcome your comments and questions in our chat, whether you're on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube watching. Send us a message or a question, and love to pose it to our panel. So first off, I want to introduce Neil Borowski, who is the editor of 70and73.com, as well as Tap Into Camden. He's a veteran of the Press of Atlantic City and various news outlets. And we have Clyde Hughes, who's the founder and editor of Frontrunner New Jersey, which is a news organization dedicated to the voices of the minority communities here in New Jersey as a whole, but particularly southern New Jersey. So we really have two good guys and smart folks. I always say, gentlemen, it's great to do this think tank because I meet people more successful and smarter than me. So I can always feel inferior. So thanks for that. But no, I say that in jest. But they're really excited to have you guys on, and want to start with Neil. So, Neil, you and I never had the chance to meet when you were covering the Press of Atlantic City as the executive editor from 2009 to 13. But you had sent us an email, and I thought it was a very profound email after our first roundtable last month about this topic. And you brought up some interesting points. You said, hey, look, it was interesting, but there was a whole lot of, hey, remember when, and really want to focus on some issues. And you made the point that really it's all about relevance for the reader and kind of watching this mess and picking up from where we left on our last roundtable. So talk to us about 70and73.com. Frankly, it was a big driver in local media. How do you make money? How is your business model? And how do you make that relevant for people to know Route 70 and 73, Cherry Hill, Marlton, that area? How do you make it relevant for folks in the Camden, Burlington communities?
Well, I think we're kind of all victims of our experience in the news business. And that's one of the things I said to you about the panel, and what you hear whenever you get a bunch of journalists together. There's a lot of hand-wringing about, oh, it's changed and all that. Well, yes, it's changed and we need to move on. But how do we move on? And I think a lot of digital sites like mine, 70 and 73, are trying to find relevance. When I started 70 and 73 in early 2020, just in time for the pandemic, I thought that the model of local coverage that I had known on newspapers, schools, and other types of things like that would be where we'd go. I started covering a few planning board meetings and zoning board meetings and found out that that was highly relevant. And it's kind of a duh moment for me, but a lot of newspapers had stopped covering meetings and covering planning boards and zoning boards, but I started writing about developments that were planned in the suburban communities in Cherry Hill and Voorhees and Evesham and Mount Laurel, and got amazing response and engagement on Facebook and other social media. And so we've done, I'd say 80% of what we do is that now. So I think we're trying to, on the smaller sites like mine, we're trying to be relevant, but also, if you will, find our relevance.
Well, that's a good point, and I think it's a good transition to Clyde. And Clyde, let me switch you off here. Clyde, you had reached out to me, and rightfully so, in anticipation of our first roundtable. You said, "Hey, Suleiman, good roundtable, but you're really lacking voices of color." And look, you were right, and I admitted that to you. It was an oversight on our part, but clearly, in historically disadvantaged communities, whether it be Camden City or Atlantic City, certainly the information gap, one could argue, is probably more exacerbated in Black and Brown communities. So, in the kind of the model of Neil, he calls it, I would give you more credit than that, not a little operation. It's only got a readership and a following and a lot of presence on social media, and I think that same quality applies to you, Clyde, and Front Runner New Jersey. So talk to us about Front Runner New Jersey, your model, but also how, is there an even bigger gap in this news desert with communities of color, Atlantic City, Pleasantville, Millville, Bridgeton, Vineland. Talk to us about why that kind of got you into your long career in journalism.
Just a little bit of my background. I started off as a cub reporter my senior year in college at my hometown newspaper in Beaumont, Texas, and I stayed there for 6 years, and I worked for the next almost 20 in Toledo at the Toledo Blade. Since then, I did a little bit of PR, and I've been freelancing ever since. And when I moved to New Jersey, South Jersey, about 6 years ago, I started picking up newspapers because bad habit. That's what I do. and I looked for the minority publication to find out what was going on in the African American community, the Latino communities, and I was really surprised, as condensed as New Jersey is, that I really didn't find. Well, I didn't find any publications, so I just figured, well, maybe I'll just start a blog and see if there's any interest in this type of news coverage in South Jersey. And 6 years later, I'm proud to say that we have found a niche and a coverage area that people are responding to, and it's something that I used to do at my old newspaper. So it was easy for me in coverage. The thing that's foreign to me is that you have to wear a lot of different hats. You got to wear the business hat, the salesman hat, the marketing hat, as well as when all I want to do is just cover news. So it is definitely a different animal for me, but there is an opportunity because, as you mentioned before, we are in a news desert. Matter of fact, I can't think of another area that I have lived in that did not have a TV station that dedicates their TV news to the area that you live in. Because South Jersey doesn't have a TV news station. You have to depend on Philadelphia, and Philadelphia is not coming into South Jersey unless there's something really extreme that's going on in South Jersey, and especially in the Atlantic City, Millville, Cape May areas. It's very, very tough to get coverage. So we have found a niche. We're growing. We're continuing to grow. To grow. Advertisers are starting to find us, which is good. We are very fortunate for you. Mentioned the New Jersey Civic Information Consortium, and we're proud to be to have been funded by them for the last 2 years. So that has allowed us an opportunity to do some things that we normally would not have done before, just because of finances. And I don't want to get too much into the weeds until a little later, but I worked at one of those newspapers where we covered every meeting. We covered every city council meeting. We covered every school board meeting in the town, because we were the newspaper of record. There were politicians who would fear the Blade, because they know if a lawsuit was going to be filed against them, our court reporter who's going through their normal rounds of checking lawsuits that's been filed will eventually find that lawsuit and report on it. Those aren't happening today. courts, you don't have that reporter who's just sitting at the courthouse going through lawsuits that have been filed, or or indictments that have been filed. Those things aren't happening anymore because those things cost money. It costs money to park a reporter every day at the courthouse. We had a bureau literally in a city hall and at the police station. Those things aren't happening anymore, and I think uh, our community and our democracy is less for it because we don't have those watchdogs literally in the building every day. Talking to the police chief, talking to court clerks, finding out what's going on, and things like that. So it is the news desert presents a challenge, and not to overstate it, because I'm a reporter, it may sound self-serving, but it harms our community. It harms the democracy that we live in and count on because we don't have that watchdog and we don't have that constant coverage to hold people accountable.
Well, you bring up a good point, and Neil, I want to read a passage of an email you sent me. Over the last few years, I found readers are desperately wanting to read not about politics, but about zoning boards and planning boards and what's going on in their backyards. And you talk about you have a fixtures column every week that a freelance writer does for you, that you focus on businesses and institutions that have been a part of our lives in suburbia for decades, and readers love that. And, to Clyde's point, that report at the courthouse covering stuff that maybe isn't as sexy. Is that kind of there's more pressure on local entities like 1773.com as well as to Front Row New Jersey that you're kind of going, you may be going where the action is, not so much whether a reporter or journalist deems is important. Similar to, not comparing you guys to this, but NJ.com does the Peach Genovese. Here's the top 10 sub places in New Jersey. And it's clickbait, right? Let's be honest. No offense to NJ.com, but it is. But is that the kind of trend now for you guys to get those advertising dollars in, to focus on some of those stories, which are important, but maybe not are as sexy and exciting or more important as some of those more meat and potatoes issues that are deemed as kind of old school journalism?
No, it's a good point, and Clyde really hit it on the head. I mean, I spent 21 years at the Philadelphia Inquirer, and my last position there was deputy New Jersey editor, and we had 45 people in the Cherry Hill office, and they don't have that anymore. We at one point, I think the Inquirer came out with a twice a week neighbor section that was just filled with local news, meeting news, and stuff like that. That doesn't happen anymore. Barely do they ever get anybody from Philadelphia to cover a story in New Jersey. So that was then, and this is now. And what is the right blend? Well, I kind of take it on myself to do the kind of the meeting agenda, court coverage that we used to do. I spend the first hour every day going over agendas and looking where meetings went and things like that. But I felt that we were getting a little too, I don't know, would dry be the word? If we were doing too much on one town, would it be boring to another town if it wasn't relevant to them? If that's where the development news was. And it does tend to switch among the towns, but I was a little worried. And then at the same time, several longtime businesses in our area went out of business, and people were like, it was like a funeral online, on Facebook and all that. And I got to thinking that the suburbs really don't have any kind of history. I mean, Cherry Hill really became Cherry Hill in 1961, used to be Delaware Township. So I said, well, what if we looked at the businesses and the institutions that have been around even back into the 50s? And it's become a real hit with readers. Is it heavy duty news? No, but it's certainly worth the investment of me paying once a week a freelancer to do that story for us.
Yeah, and that's. Are we at a point now, and we actually lost Clyde? So Clyde, if you're listening, please log back in. Yeah, that's okay. Our guest last night, Neil, was actually doing his roundtable with us from Egypt, so we had a hell of a lot of difficulties there, but it was a great conversation. Look, are we at the point now, and frankly, a market like Southern New Jersey, where journalism can't be a full-time job, whether it's you have freelancers or you have part-time reporters that also have another job or side hustle or whatever. We just at the point now where a few folks will have full-time livings, but the rest of you and us, it's just you're going to maybe be a reporter for two different organizations, or your real estate on one side and then you do reporting. I mean, is that just a new normal?
I frankly don't know. I mean, you look at me, I get my Social Security check every month, and that's helping. And 70 and 73 is about breaking even. We have a contract with Tap Into, and I'm making some money on that. So it's kind of a patchwork quilt for me. I can't imagine being 35 and trying to do this with a family and maybe kids heading toward college. And we have people working hard. I mentioned earlier to you the fellow who does njpen.com. Which is in kind of the Haddon Township area. He does a nice job, and he knows his community. He really knows it well. So there's a tough business model for that. And if you look at a lot of the sites that have been successful, you see, one, they're nonprofits, and number two, they're successful because they're getting a lot of grants. There's one site, a large site that I won't mention, that I had a reason to look at lately, and I looked at their 990s, and they went from getting a lot of money to having, I think, a $5 million loss last year. So I really wonder whether support by the nonprofit sector for nonprofits is the answer. I don't know. But one thing I did want to bring up, and I don't want to
Please.
monopolize the time, but if you think about it, people like us, our age group, we kind of view journalism with how it was. But if you look at maybe the two youngest generations and how do they view news? What is news to them? Can they be discerning about news? And at the same time, you have former President Trump talking about fake news. Tilt it down. Somebody asked me to tilt it down. Okay.
No, that was actually for Clyde.
Oh, for Clyde. Okay.
Sorry.
We have a whole different kind of news consumer out there now. And at the same time, I found politicians, when I ask for things from politicians, they're surprised. They've not dealt with reporters in their political careers because they're younger. So, there's no crime in being younger, of course, but you really wonder what the two youngest generations, how they will be as news consumers and how we can answer that.
Yeah, we talked about, then we'll bring Clyde. Glad we got you back, Clyde. I lost you. I said, oh no, one of our men are down. But, are we at a point now where everything's so fragmented now where, I know both your organizations share news articles and hopefully they reciprocate. And, locally in Atlantic County and Cape May County, Linda Cohen does the crime news. And another entity does the sports news, and New Jersey Globe does the political news. And is it just there's no more, maybe that's the recommendation, right? Just you have this agglomeration of various news sites that cover different things, and the reader has to cover multiple, and get their news that way. Because to your point, Clyde, then Neil, then we'll bring Clyde in. Look, coming from the political world, David Wildstein makes the point that the least known position in the state of New Jersey is the county commissioner, formerly known as a freeholder, because they get zero coverage. The legislature gets coverage, governor gets coverage, even some town count, but nobody covers county government, and nobody knows who their commissioner is, other than a news organization will say, okay, well here's who's on the ballot this year, these random names you've never heard of. And does that do a disservice when these county governments are spending literally hundreds of millions of dollars of your money? And God bless, Clyde's back. We spend hundreds of millions of dollars of your taxpayer dollars, and there's no coverage of it. So, I think, is that the future? And Clyde, we got you back. I think you're having some internet troubles, Clyde, so you may go out. But jump into the potpourri of that discussion there. You there, Clyde?
Yes, yes. I did
Okay.
miss the question though.
Oh, that's okay. We were just talking about whether we're at this point now where you've got just there's no one entity that covers everything now. You know, is it if you want news in community, disadvantaged communities, you go to Front Runner. If you want, you know, certain news about suburbia, you go to Neil. If you want, uh, is it just that everything's fragmented and the reader just has to check out multiple different news sources instead of the old school? You go to one Courier Post, Vineland Daily Journal, Press Atlantic City, and there's your news source. Is that the new normal?
I think that's probably the new normal. I remember in part one that Scott was really bemoaning the fact that the news is so fragmented, but radio's been fragmented for years. TV is now more fragmented because now you have a channel specialized for just news, a channel specialized for sports, and so uh, and in other areas as well. So I'm not particularly surprised that our newsrooms are now more fragmented than ever, and our news platforms, and I don't think that's a bad idea because in the end, the reader gets to choose, where they want to get their specific a news interest from, and going to different websites. So I don't necessarily think it's a bad idea. In some ways, it's a good idea because you can get a more if you're interested in a particular topic, you could get a more specialized coverage. But there was always the convenience. If you went to that daily newspaper record of the day that you can find everything in. And at the Toledo Blade, we had a newsroom of 120 people, and we literally covered everything. So I do understand the convenience in that, and that's where I grew up in covering these different things. That's what I was used to, and so this is a new environment. In news coverage where it is very fragmented, but I'm not sure if it's any better or worse than what we had.
Well, one thing I
Well,
agree
talk
with
to me,
Clyde. I
Clyde.
think that
Go ahead,
well,
Neil, please. Yeah.
I mean, I was just going to say I totally agree in that. Yeah,
No, go
I
ahead,
don't know
Neil,
that
please.
fragmentation is bad.
Yeah.
I think when we ran larger news organizations like in Toledo or Philadelphia or wherever, Atlantic City, we kind of fooled ourselves into thinking we really knew our audience.
Yeah.
I don't think we did. But Clyde, you certainly know your audience in Atlantic City. I like to think I know my audience here in the suburbs, and there's something very good about that. We don't cover sports, we don't cover some other things, but the things we cover, we really dig down deeply into, and I think you do the same. So maybe the goal is to have a lot of fragmented news sites, and the news consumer of the future maybe takes 5 or 6 and gets the full view from them. I don't know.
And is that one of? Oh, go ahead, Clyde, please.
No, I would have to agree. When I was at the Toledo Blade, the minority community was one of several areas that I covered, and at times you really couldn't focus totally on one or the other, whether it was the minority community or the police beat or government. Where what I do with FrontrunnerNewJersey.com, I concentrate fully on the African American and Latino communities, and there is a lot of coverage. You'd be surprised how many times that matter of fact, just today, how many times I run into people who are newsworthy, who I would, if I was at a daily newspaper, I would be covering them anyway, and they tell me I am the first reporter that they ever talked to. So there's plenty of news out there, and there's plenty of things that I think readers are interested in and viewers are interested in. So back to Neil's point, I don't think the fragmentation is bad, but it is very new for news consumers.
So talk to me, Clyde, about we're trying to figure out solutions to fill this local media void, and as I think we said in the outset, we really want to release a report in September on this, really capitalize on it, and actually get this in front of policymakers and the general public and say, hey, here's our report, what do you think? And really just start getting on some solutions. But yeah, you penned an op-ed in New Jersey Spotlight in 2021, and you talked about this concept of Facebook Bulletin. Now, since that time, Meta pulled the plug on Facebook Bulletin.
Yes, they did.
So I'm curious to know about what that was. Quite frankly, was it successful? And is that a start of a trend, or maybe an unsuccessful trend, frankly, of social media companies trying to partner up with traditional or non-traditional news agencies to get more eyeballs or more users engaged on their platforms? So talk to us about that experiment of Facebook Bulletin.
Yeah, and I think you're going to have a spits and starts here. You're going to you're going to try some things. Some things are going to be successful, and some things are going to fail. I think the thing with Facebook Bulletin is that I wish they would have given it more time. Facebook challenged Substack for to see who would be the newsletter king of the world, and I don't think either one of them won that battle. It's still going on, and Facebook wanted to go into another direction. But you're going to have those ups and downs as we figure out what's going to play well with the audience, and also what's going to make money. Because in the end, the bosses are going to want to make money. And as a reporter, that's new for me, because I always think of content first. And I know if I have to treat this as a business, and I have to really concentrate on the business end. But I still think a lot that there is a great value in content. There's a great value in good content. And if you produce good content, that people are going to find you regardless of the format. So in the Facebook experience, I think it was just one of those trial and error things that didn't move as fast as Facebook wanted it to. But I think you are going to see other companies and other social media outlets try this format in the future, because for all the fragmentation, what they've learned is that there is a real hunger for news. There is a real hunger for news out there that people, it may not, now people can find just about anything that they have an opinion on. The great thing about the internet is that anyone can jump on and create their own website. And now, the bad thing about the internet is that anyone can jump on and create their own website. But I happen to think we're living in the Wild West period of news. And just as the Wild West was tamed, eventually something is going to happen, or a series of things are going to happen that will eventually tame this news Wild West. I think you saw, not to get political, but I think you saw in January the 6th, 2021, what happens when you have a proliferation of misinformation and disinformation out there in the public. And I don't think anyone, if you're talking to any reasonable person, no one can walk away from that and say that was a proud moment for the United States of America. And that was fueled, much of it, by misinformation and disinformation in the media circles, in social media circles. And I think there's gonna be a time where we're gonna want to come back to having those secure news sources. Call me naive, but we are going to come back where we're going to want these secure news sources that we can actually trust again. Right now, everyone is going to places that agrees with them. But eventually we are going to come back to this information correct? Is this information reliable? And I think eventually, and again, call me naive, that will be the winning formula of the day, where people.
Nope, I think we lost Clyde there. But Neil, let me jump to you. I think to Clyde's point, this idea of what's the role of social media in filling that local news void, and it can be frustrating. All these towns have their new Facebook groups now, that are town specific, and people put on there, I need a recommendation for a plumber, and I think we got Clyde back. We lost you, Clyde. But the misinformation travels of, well, I went to this town council meeting and here's what happened, whether that's true or not. And has that been used to get your articles out? And I guess the question is, not looking for specific numbers here, unless you know them off the top of your head, but how much of your readership comes from folks typing in the URL 70and73.com versus finding your articles on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, whatever? What's the kind of the percentage of that? And is that the new normal where people are going to find your content on social media rather than go, let's say, to courierpost.com or pressofatlanticcity.com?
Well, about 80% of our hits or views come from social media. Some come from our main page, but and the reason for that is I think I'm a member of about 16 different community Facebook pages, some of them with 20,000 followers. So they're huge. And the people who administer the pages have let me on. They're great people, and they're very community minded. And I'm able to post my stories on those pages, and they like it. If a story sometimes, if I don't post a story on sometimes because I didn't think it would be of interest, I'll sometimes hear from the administrator of that page saying, hey, why didn't you post it on our site? And I found that there is a great deal of interest, even if it isn't your own community. So Facebook is really driving a lot of our readers. That's how they get to know us. And one thing I want to point out, though, as far as even deeper fragmentation, is no one licensed me or Clyde or anyone in journalism to be a journalist. This is in England. We're not certified. We don't take a test. We just decided, hey, we want to be a newspaper reporter. So we went to work for a newspaper way back when. All these citizens are doing good work. I wanted to mention one, a guy named Neil Stein here in Evesham Township. And I'm a big fan of what he does. He has a Facebook page called The View from Evesham. And he does a lot of work on it. And he focuses on businesses opening and closing, and whether the vacant store down there, what it's going to change to. And he does look at the planning board and the zoning board as well to get hints. But he's just got that whole thing covered so well. And he's a citizen journalist. I mean, he's a journalist like we are. So I have to. You can't overlook that. There are people who do want to spread misinformation, but there are a lot of people who are very good at getting the word out.
Yeah, and I just Clyde, you're having some internet issues, so maybe you can. We got to lobby Atlantic City to invest in infrastructure. But to your point, Neil, I mean, I'll give another example. And again, I think maybe part of the report's going to be we're going to have to embrace fragmentation and use that to the public's advantage. There's a site called 42 Freeway, if you're familiar with that. It's really laser focused on transportation, and they've done, I forget the gentleman's name that runs it, but they've done some incredible articles on the Direct Connect project and that disaster of the retaining wall breaking, and really just great. Now, is it the most exciting thing? No, but if it's another guy like a Larry Higgs with the Star Ledger. He just does great. Now he's a freelancer primarily, but he does some great work in the transportation industry. And I think that. But again, can you make your whole living on just covering transportation? Probably not. To be
Right,
honest with
right.
you.
And
So therein lies the problem. And to your point, I mean, I know it came up in our first thing, and we'll try to get Clyde back on. Do we try to make it easier for-profit businesses to become nonprofits, or does the state subsidize or the nonprofit? Does somebody subsidize all these groups with more grants? I mean, you can't give every news agency a grant, right? But I mean, are you going to get, or is it kind of like the old newspaper industry where, let's be honest, the newspapers are propped up by legal ads and public ads that municipalities and counties have to take? Christie got a lot of flack, and rightfully so, for trying to dismantle it. He just wanted to punish the news industries after the whole Bridgegate nonsense. But, a lot of these towns and counties always complain that I've got to spend all this money for legal ads for RFPs that nobody looks at or reads anyway. And do you have to do some sort of model for these non-printed news agencies? Now, we don't want to advocate necessarily that, because then taxes will go up and the people complain. But, is there some sort of subsidy that has to happen to induce more news coverage?
yeah, I mean, I hate the thought of subsidies. I think that the federal legislation being considered that would give businesses tax breaks to advertise in the media, maybe. It doesn't feel right. Maybe it doesn't feel right because, I've always been in a business that has paid for itself and really answered to no one except the reader and the owners in some cases. But I don't know. Subsidies don't feel right to me, and I think a lot of the large foundations also that have subsidized some of the nonprofits are not going to be around forever. So I don't know. I don't know. I really honestly don't know what the long-term model is. I don't think anyone does. I think that, you mentioned making money at it. A lot of the citizen journalists, as we used to call them, but the people who do like 42 Freeway and A View from Isham and other things, a generation ago, before my generation, people had hobbies. They did model trains and they did, gardening and things like that. What's to say having a day job, but then your hobby is covering some very fragmented aspect of the news, as 42 Freeway does? There's nothing wrong with that, and it's very, very helpful to the community.
Yeah, and maybe to your point, Clyde, to talk about what role nonprofits or public governments provide subsidies or grants or what have you. I mean, I kind of, maybe you liken it to a volunteer firefighter, right? Volunteer firefighters, that's in their name, volunteer, but they either have what's called a LoSAP program or some sort of stipend, incentive, whatever, where it's not a career, it's not a job, but at least there's some shekels and support and money, frankly, you're getting. And is that some type of model where it's more freelance part-timers, but maybe there's a grant or funding that to Neil's point, if someone wants to be a citizen journalist, at least they get something, at least pay for gas or
Right.
spending money or what have you. So what are your thoughts on that,
Uh,
Clyde?
Now, I heard in part one of your series that the tax credits for companies advertising with newspapers. I like that idea. I don't know how far it's going to go, because there's such a bad taste in people's mouths about the news business, which is very unfortunate. But we have to discover a model that's going to fund the press, because the old model of advertisement is broken, and I don't think it's going to ever be repaired. I don't think newspapers will ever get those profits again from advertising, and the public and companies are just not trusting digital enough to completely move that money over to digital. There are some signs. I don't know what the model is, but there needs to be a model created. Yes, and there are part-time journalists who have done and freelance journalists who have done a good job. But in the long run, though, I honestly believe that, to do really good journalism, to do really good investigative journalism, you need someone, you need a group of reporters, full time working on these things. For example, for FrontRunner NewJersey.com, I have a day job that I do, and when I finish, I think of 100 things I would have rather have been doing for FrontRunner NewJersey.com. But so it's all this, trying to figure this out. It's going to be a challenge. We're going to have our starts and falls and everything, but some way we have to come up with a model. Now, is that nonprofit? Then you're dependent on grants and membership and subscribership. And you have to remember, in the old days, subscription never really funded newspapers the way advertising did. Now, you used subscriptions and circulations to set your prices for advertising, but we never depended on subscriptions to fuel the cost of running a newspaper. So I'm not convinced that memberships are the answer either. And I'm not fully convinced that nonprofits have done a great job. ProPublica is now winning Pulitzer prizes. And they're completely a nonprofit model. So you can do outstanding journalism work being a nonprofit, and I'm not saying that. But ProPublica is also now well funded. They're a well funded nonprofit as well. So it's going to be a challenge in trying to figure out what's going to be that model that works, where we can fund newspapers to where they really need to be funded. In today's model, there's a reason why in the Bill of Rights and the First Amendment that protections for the press was put in. We're the only business that's protected in the Constitution, and there's a reason for that, because there is a value to the community for having a vibrant and active and truly free press. And I think if we can have people truly understand that importance, and I think some people do, but getting back to why this business, and again, I don't want to sound self-serving, but why this business is relevant, why it's important, and why it needs to be supported. Hopefully from that we will come up with a sustainable model for what we're doing.
Yeah, I wonder too if somehow Neil brought up the idea of the citizen journalist, and people trying to fill their own narratives or fill in the holes on social media with their nonsense. I mean, do you have it where entities like yours or others or the conglomerates start training citizens on how to be journalists, even if it's just unpaid? Just, hey, here's how to be fair and balanced and objective. I could see that being horribly abused for folks to use it for political gain if you just have a Fox News or an MSNBC. So I'm cognizant of that. But how do you do people know the idea of on the record, off the record? Do people know how to fairly cover something? I get frustrated, candidly, because folks try to cover, certain aspects of public policy or government. And, with all due respect, I just want to tell the reporter, you don't know what the hell you're talking about. 'Cause you don't know how to cover this. You don't know what the issue is. You don't know how to, even in an election, you don't know. It's frustrating because sometimes you feel like, as the person being interviewed, you got to educate the reporter. And then maybe is it that we've got to educate the general public on the citizen journalism and fill that local void, or maybe, to your point, Neil, they're just covering it on a Evesham Facebook page, and that contributes to our democratic republic, and maybe they're not making money off it. But frankly, for that person, it's just they're doing good. They, should we turn journalism more into public service rather than a career? I mean, unless you work for the New York Times or Washington Post, is it a career anymore? A full-time career? I don't know.
Well, I think that I personally think the companies like Gannett and Lee and those companies will probably go bankrupt eventually. I don't think that they'll be players. I think that everything points that way, and it's not a nice thing to say. I mean, it's sad to say. I mean, I worked for Gannett and they were wonderful to me, but I don't think they're going to last. It's a business model that doesn't work. But there are other ideas. I mean, what if a salesperson from the Inquirer or the Press of Atlantic City or wherever is laid off and is trying to think of something? What if you had a sales aggregator? What if you took me and you took NJ Penn and you took Clyde's publication and some of the others, and that individual pulled them all together, and our total page views is what you sold to an advertiser trying to reach South Jersey? Would that work? I've often thought about that. It might be too early for that, but that might be a possibility in the future, where we all have the same kind of regional advertising. We all share in it based on the number of page views that we contribute.
Well, I think that's fascinating. I'd be curious your
Yeah.
thoughts on that, Clyde, because for your guys' example, I wouldn't necessarily say you're competing with each other. I think you complement each other. If Clyde, you're both, let's say, covering two historically disadvantaged communities in Camden and Atlantic City. Neil, you're taking more of the suburbia approach. Clyde, you're taking more of the urban approach. And, does that complement a potential advertiser if you run a business? Like, hey, you're advertising two separate audiences, but we're kind of going to bundle this in one where, frankly, there may be a savings for you. Neil and Clyde get a little bit of a nut, frankly. And does that help the broader world? What do you think, Clyde?
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. I heard some rumblings of groups wanting to do that. I think it's a great idea. Frankly, I hope some days, sooner than later, someone would really take the ball and run with that. Since news is so fragmented, I think it's just a natural progression that to sell news in that way, for bundling different sites together with their readership. But also to the point Neil made about Gannett, one of the things is that we shoot ourselves in the foot so often, particularly the bigger newspapers. And I will use this example. When I was in Indiana, I was freelancing for a Gannett outlet, the Journal and Courier in West Lafayette, and they had a fantastic writer in Jeff Washburn. Fantastic sports writer. He had he's covered Purdue University for more than 20 years and had all this historical knowledge. In fact, he was just elected to the Indiana Sports Writers Hall of Fame the week he was let go from the Journal and Courier. Because some pencil pusher in Reston, Virginia, said, "Hey, this guy's making more money than everyone else. We're going to eliminate his position." Now, the immediate word you got out on the streets in Lafayette, Indiana, because I was there, was, why should I pick up a Journal and Courier again? I don't get to read Jeff Washburn. That was a decision where someone in Virginia said this was a good move, and not realizing how many readers he lost that day by cutting that position. And that's what I mean by, a lot of times these larger newspapers are making decisions that actually is killing them, and they think it's helping them. I can't remember who said it, that content is king. Content in many respects is still king, and you have to be you have to respect the news creators out there who are drawing the audience, and you can't just take a meat cleaver and cut out the highest paying positions, and think you're going to keep your publication alive, because when that writer goes, his readership is going as well, and all of a sudden that publication is way less valuable to you before you made that cut.
Well, let me ask you this to the group as we're winding down here, kind of the future, and we agree it's fragmented, and kind of be creative with the business model of it. Is it kind of even if the traditional outlets are going to survive, and unfortunately, I agree with Neil. I think one of the outlets in Southern New Jersey is probably going to go under probably in 5 years, which is depressing. You look at the press links; they're 3 days a week print. Violent Daily Journal, no disrespect to them, not fault the reporters. They don't really have much of a newsroom now, to be honest with you, which is sad. But is it kind of cutting back on the traditional stuff that made a newspaper what it was, and maybe not incorporate that in the future? For example, Neil and I were talking before we logged on, before you came on, Clyde, about obituaries, and it still kind of feels like old school, that you've got to. If someone passes away, I love when you put the obituary in the newspaper, because that's like the note of record. And my old boss, Jim Whalen, would say it's the Irish news, reading the obituaries to see who passed away that week. But is that not necessarily a model anymore of who's spending, to Neil's point, $500 for an obituary? Who can afford, frankly, to spend $500 on obituary? As much as you love somebody, if you're from a lower income, it's not easy. Or this idea of editorial boards, the op-eds, and newspapers used to be big on the endorsements or the interviews. And is that passé now? I mean, look, I got to be honest with you, I seldomly read letters to the editor anymore. I seldomly read press editorials of any outlet. I just, I have my own opinions, and I don't. I want to come for the news. I can read commentary, maybe a few. I know Leonard Pitts was always covering the press links. I always enjoyed his stuff, for example. But is that stuff passé? And is that the new folks of? Do your outlets have a thing where you can send op-eds, but that's the extent of it? I just think, is there some things that are passé that kind of don't fit in this new world of digital journalism?
Well, I think that, I think there's something there to be done on people who die. I think there's a story to be told. When I was at the Indianapolis Star, we started up the A Life Well Lived, or a Life Lived, which other papers had done. And it was immensely popular because we actually waited 6 weeks after the death, 4 weeks after the death, and then told the story after the family had grieved, and people loved it. So I think there's something there in that area. But as far as selling obits, I don't know. I mean, I think that there is a market for, public or websites like ours to write a story on a dead person, and the family would pay us to write the story, and not a lot, not anywhere near what they're paying for a print obit. But, in my opinion, a basic obit should be free, but I don't know how to deliver that. I don't know how to do that. But, one thing I wanted to mention, though, before we ended, and, we kind of pile it on the legacy newsrooms like Gannett and Lee and some of the others. But if you're just a reader and you're watching, you shouldn't lose sight of the fact that there are still heroes in those newsrooms.
Absolutely.
And those are the people who were the last four reporters standing. And I know them. They don't view the corporation as who they're trying to please. They view their readers as who they're trying to please. And many of them are just working their butts off. So anything that we're critical about the large media companies, we're certainly not critical about those who are still doing journalism.
I'm glad you pointed that out, Neil, and then I'll give the word to Clyde. But yeah, we want to make clear we respect the men and women who do a service. Just because their employers aren't doing them a service doesn't mean that they're not doing the public a service. So Clyde, over to you.
No, matter of fact, I know some people who I've run into the trails from the press, the Courier Post, and they are doing incredible work with few resources. I think if I had as few resources as they are working with now, it would have driven me crazy as a reporter, where they have to not only report and write. And I've also learned that they have to do web versions of their story before they can do the print versions of their story. And then they're also asked to get on social media to even promote it. I don't know if working in that model today would have just sent me screaming out of a newsroom. But the guys who are in the guys and gals who are in the legacy newsrooms right now, yes, I agree. They are doing one hell of a job with the few resources that they have. And like I said, I came from a newsroom with 120 people. That's probably a fraction of what it is now. And trying to do that same amount of work with such few people, it's yeoman's work.
Absolutely.
Well, I guess as we wrap up, I guess final question for the group is if there's one thing that you want to get out to the public about this fixing this news desert, or one recommendation you have, I think let's just kind of go around the horn. I'll just say the one thing is, just asking folks to have more faith in non-traditional news sources, just because it doesn't have the fancy calligraphy of a New York Times or Washington Post doesn't mean it's bad. Frankly, there's a lot of great work that hasn't printed one newspaper or done one thing yet that really are doing a great service to us. So I would just say that to folks, and just say too, please vet the information you're getting, whether it's from the news source, Facebook, whatever. Just because you read it, just because someone with a fancy title puts it, doesn't make it always accurate. So, especially on social media, if you see something about a town council meeting or something else, just please vet that. So, Neil, one thought, comment for the general public stressing about local news coverage. What would you say to him?
Well,
John,
if the general public is out there, I would say, please consider what we're doing at 1773 and tap into Camden as a work in progress. We're finding our way. It's a whole new kind of wilderness. And one of the things we love is to hear from people who are reading us. And it's a great email to get is, hey, why don't you cover this with good ideas? So stay in touch with whoever's doing it in your community, and understand we're kind of reinventing things.
I think that's excellent. Clyde, what about you?
I would say give us a chance. Give us a chance and check us out. Check us out on a regular basis. We are doing the work that used to be done by dozens of reporters, and I think we're finding our way. And also, readers are starting to become engaged. For example, our newsletter, when we were putting our newsletter out, and we're about to start it up again, the national average of opens in a news for a newsletter is about 5%, 10%. We were getting 50% opens in our newsletter, which tells you that our audience may be small and growing, but they are engaged, and they are and they are sharing that information with other people, and then they're sharing it as well. So I think that our readership is engaged and I would like to tell other readers and advertisers to take a chance on us. Check out what we're doing here, what Neil is doing, what Tap Into is doing, and in these other digital websites. Everyone is doing their best to bring to fill that gap in this news desert. I can't express more. We are truly in a news desert, and everyone is making that effort to fill that gap to make sure that the public is getting what they deserve as far as news coverage.
Well, gentlemen, very well said. I really appreciate you taking the time. We'll say goodbye after we end this live stream. But Neil Borowski, Clyde Hughes, thank you so much. Please check out 70and73.com. Please check out FrontRunnerNewJersey.com. let's continue the conversation. I said earlier, we invite them to contribute to our report. We hope to issue that report sometime in September, and hopefully we won't have all the answers, but hopefully consolidate all these great ideas into some tangible points that policymakers and the public can take and try to fill this desert of news coverage here in Southern New Jersey. So with that, thank you everybody for tuning in, and we look forward to talking to you soon.